Welcome to this second installment of the series Musical Offerings for Human Rights. Today's presentation is called Asian Echoes and features music of Chinary and Wen-chung as performed by the Da Capo chamber players. I'm Harvey Sollberger and I will moderate our discussions. Before we move on to the music, I'll just say a word or two about the Da Capo chamber players. They're about to celebrate their 50th season, and this in itself is most extraordinary. Over the years, they have recorded many works. They have commissioned 150 pieces and done extensive touring, including visits to Russia and different parts of Europe. I will now, at this point, in fact, turn things over to my friend and fellow flutist, Patricia Spencer, to go ahead and introduce the first piece on our program.
Thank you, Harvey. Welcome to all of you listeners. I'm the flutist, as Harvey said. We're thrilled that you could join us for this new venture, becoming more aware of how music captures cultures, their rhythms, their moods, their spirit. Our guiding theme is to let the music help us honor and celebrate every different culture's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And since the music is going to help, we'll start with the music. Written shortly after a period when singing was forbidden by a repressive regime, Chinary child song brings us rhythms and, in the middle section, a paraphrased version of a Cambodian children's game song. We hope you enjoy it.
Wow, what a wonderful, superb performance of a piece of music that itself more or less personifies and defines the word eloquent. I would like to discuss this piece now with Pat and with a couple of other colleagues, including the composer himself. I will welcome him now. The first colleague who will join us is Marianne Githfeld, who is a clarinetist. She is chair of the Brooklyn College Conservatory of Music and head of the woodwind area there. And she is also the clarinetist with the Thalia ensemble, the Zephyros Winds, and the Kaleidoscope ensemble. And not secondly, but not second necessarily, is our composer, Chinary. Chinary is a native of Cambodia, and he has lived in the United States since the 1960s. His work, Inner Voices, was commissioned by the Philadelphia Orchestra and received the very prestigious Grawemeyer Prize in 1987. Chinary was the first American to receive this prize and the only Cambodian so far. Chinary has taught composition at the University of California, San Diego, since 1995, where he and I, in fact, were colleagues for a number of years. He holds the title there of Distinguished Professor of Music. And last but not least, in his graduate school days, Chinary was a pupil of Chou Wen-chung, the second composer on our program. So I'll turn things over to Pat to start the discussion, and we will learn some things about child song.
Thank you, Harvey, and thank you, Chinary, for writing such a wonderful piece. It's so rich. I just enjoy it every time I listen again. And I wonder if you could tell us more about the tradition of song in Cambodia. Is it anything like ballet, where the villagers gather together and play gamelan, or is it totally different? Or if you want to also tell us about the particular children's game that this piece is depicting, that would be delightful.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Capo, for this stunning performance, and I loved it. I listened to like 2 or 3 times already. Yeah, and your flute playing is superb, really. Thank you. Yes, somewhere in the middle of child's song, there is a paraphrase, a musical paraphrase of a children song. Okay, believe it or not, 75 years ago, I was one of those children who actually literally played the kind of equivalent to patty cake. And this bring back the very fond memory from my childhood. The text, if I may translate it roughly, I read here: pour the coconut juice the rooster tail wears the crocodile coat. The crocodile rides the horse, and I ride the elephant. You see, if you look at just in terms of imagery, pour the coconut juice. And the second clause, a rooster tail wears the crocodile coat. The contrast, all of these things, and this is all over a number of songs in Cambodia tend to have tend to utilize a sense of abstraction quite a bit. Okay, and also another angle is the rhyme. They really care about the flow of the text, the musical flow, and that seems to be the spirit of the culture. And the text itself tend to reflect the culture, the period of that time, and so forth. Okay, and so here you are.
I'll just interject that to me it's very touching as you describe this children's sort of jingle, or one could even call it a nonsense rhyme, because I think these are found in every culture, in cultures that are very modern and in cultures that are pre-modern. I think of something like in our own culture, the ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, all fall down. I mean, there's something, it's a kid's jingle, but at the same time, what is that ashes, ashes, all fall down? I mean, is that talking about death or what? I mean, there's so much contained in these simple things that we take for granted. And I think that's true of the children's rhyme that you quoted from Cambodia. These things are universal.
Yeah, and I think, and the other one that kind of relates to this is, hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. So you have all these abstract actions happening that don't really happen in real life, but that are kind of fun images to imagine, and lots of use of animals actually also.
That's very close, to the Cambodian rhyme with the elephant and the crocodile. Yeah.
Chinary, what you were saying, Chinary, about the rhythm made me wonder what the rhythm would sound like in Cambodian. Can you tell us what those words sound like in Cambodian?
Oh, in Cambodian, chặt thực đồn tùm lông tùm lai cái tôi mon chai pe ao cơ chi se anh chi nằm rầy. Okay, and the way the children do, they put it on like three kids do this together, and they when they sing, they do this in rhythmic unison, and then with at the last syllable they release it. Whoever still holding someone this skin, the winner. So, but there are variation all over the country. A number of us trying to pinpoint, and the beauty is on the variation. It varies from village to village. You create you create some kind of mold or some kind of song, some kind of system, and then the rest is up to the local children how they're going to sing the text and so forth. Yeah.
So it's almost like a language dialect that I know in Italy, in certain villages, from village to village, the dialect of Italian spoken is different. And this is, again, something that travels like wildfire from village to village, but each village puts its own mark on it. Chinary, I'd like to ask you quickly, you wrote Child's Song in 1985, and for 11 years before that, I think you had not done any composing because you were occupied with something that to you was, I think, more important than composing. Could you tell us about what you were doing for those 11 years before you wrote Child's Song, and maybe how what you were doing influenced what you wrote then in Child's Song.
That is very true, with the exception of Sep Boon, the cello piece or a viola piece, somewhere in the middle there. And in retrospect, I still recall that I asked myself a question, or put it this way, make myself to be aware that I was born at a particular time, and there is a particular need for me to do. And that's why I did not abandon composing, but I was very receptive to work with the Cambodian refugees and the communities. We were hoping, we were trying very hard to rebuild, to reconstruct the broken culture outside of Cambodia. And inside the Cambodia, it just like a total silence, a total chaos. It was like, it was a genocide. So no, we lost 2 million lives, and it is, the border was shut down, and we call it prison without wall. Okay, you still can walk around, but you don't have that freedom. Yeah.
And this
amazing. It's amazing to me then that the first piece that you wrote after that has such well, it has contrast. I mean, we can feel the terrible angst, pardon the expression, but we also feel the delight that you were preserving that. That's just wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Conceptually, I promised myself when I was joining hand in hand with my compatriots and the Cambodian refugees to reconstruct the broken culture and all that, the arts and dance and so forth. I promised myself not to really hand dipping into the culture, the children's song and all that. You know, I imagine a circle, and then I imagine a vertical line, trace it down from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock, really solid. The left is my tradition and the right is my music. But I broke my promise. And so the solid line, the vertical solid line become dotted line. And then years later, there was no dotted line. And now there is not even a circle. It's just like plain emptiness.
Well, the piece is remarkable, and it's approaching, what, 30 years of age, over 30 years. And of course, many wonderful pieces have followed it. And having followed your musical career, Chinary, I am aware of how your music has developed and into what really new and imaginative areas your thoughts have unfolded. So thank you very much for telling us about Child's Song. And I think we're ready now to move on and consider the music of, among other things, your mentor and teacher, Chou Wen-chung. Thank you, Chinary, and thanks to my colleagues.
Thank you.
And now we turn to the music of Chou Wen-chung and his sextet called Ode to Eternal Pine. Chou Wen-chung was born in China in 1923. He died in this country in 2019. He came to the United States in 1946, where he became the student and protege of the great American composer Edgar Varese. Chou taught at Columbia University from 1964 until the 1990s, and it's there where I got to know him and in fact performed several pieces of his. Most notably, Chou Wen-chung established the US-China Arts Exchange in 1978 and served as its director. And he carried on this work for over 40 years. At a time when there was no communication artistically between the United States and China, Chou Wen-chung was the point man who opened things up. And this is something that I think people are just becoming aware of. In recognition of that, in the year 2018, there was the opening of the Wen-chung Music Resource Center at the Xingai Conservatory of Music in Guangzhou, China. So a real monument to the contributions of Wen-chung. Now, about his piece, Ode to Eternal Time. It was composed in 2009, written for the New York New Music Ensemble. The scoring is flute, clarinet, violin, cello, percussion, and piano. What I can say about this piece is that Chinese classical music, going back to antiquity, has always had a kind of metaphorical relation to Chinese philosophy and art and landscape. The names of the sections of Ode to Eternal Pine illustrate this very well. The composition begins with a prelude, and then after that, there are several sections which I should note are going to be played continuously, so there are not section breaks. But the sections are named Meditating on Eternity, followed by Ode to Eternal Pine, followed by Lofty Peaks, and then the last section is Profound Gorges. So anybody who has spent any time looking at classical Chinese ink painting, I think is very familiar with a lot of these terms. So at this point, I'll turn things over to the Capo chamber players, and we will hear their performance of Ode to Eternal Pine. What a poetic performance of Wen-chung's Ode to Eternal Pine. Thank you to Capo Chamber Players. My colleagues from earlier are back to continue our discussion, and we have a new voice entering, and I'd like to introduce him. That is Michael Lipsey, who is a percussionist and currently director of the Aaron Copland School of Music at Queens College. Michael is almost unique, I think, not only for his connection to Zhou Wen-chung, but because of the fact that he has worked with a number of Chinese American composers who came to this country from China as part of the US-China arts exchange that Zhou Wen-chung pioneered. Michael has worked with Tan Dun, Zhou Long, Chen Yi, and Bright Shen. So, and that sort of covers the peaks of some of the excellent students that Wen-chung worked with at Columbia University. Michael is also the host of the New York City Day of Percussion and has recorded extensively on a number of major labels.
Thank you, Harvey. Nice
and welcome, Michael. So at this point, I think we can move ahead and begin our discussion, and I'll throw the ball to Marianne Gitveld, who will start with the question.
Okay, thank you, Harvey. That was an amazing performance. And, you know, I'm really just drawn to the title of the piece, and just like the nursery rhymes in Chinary piece, child song is a very universal concept and something that connects us. I also think that the idea of the pine being this eternal image of nature and strength and ruggedness, it speaks to me as a Norwegian. I grew up in Norway, and that was definitely a big symbol for our people as well. So it's something that we share. Now, my question is for you, Michael. I was really drawn to the highs and lows of this piece. They were quite extreme. And of course, he does mention this, the lofty peaks and the profound gorges that is already written into the piece. How was that written into your part? I mean, I noticed any piece that starts with a grumbling bass clarinet is a great piece by my standards. And then to add that amazing percussion texture, how did that play out in your part?
Sure. Well, having played, you know, a few of Professor Chou's works, he wrote a piece, I think the date was actually 1989, but we premiered it with a New Music Consort at Merkin Concert Hall, probably 1990 or so. And I hadn't realized, I mean, I played on the recording that we just heard of Eternal Pine, and I played that, and it didn't dawn on me for some reason at the time that the titles are the same. And exactly what you're saying, this kind of like eternal pine in the sense of like universality. Because I guess what I always thought about when I heard either piece, because I listened to, you know, we performed it, and then I listened to a lot in preparation for this. And I went back and listened to the recording that I did of he considers one of his largest work, a piece called Echoes from the Gorge, was first of all, the great way he captures the rumbling, really, like you said, the rumble of the beginning of like, almost like the, you know, like you said in Denmark, or I've never been to China to see that, but I can remember sitting at the edge of the Grand Canyon, and the wind coming, you hear the wind across, and you just get this moment where everything really kind of ties really this whole event together in a certain way. This kind of universality of sound as capturing a picture, as capturing a moment, as capturing kind of an inner soul of not just the music, but, you know, that we all, I don't know whether it's we all aspire to, we all possess, or maybe a little bit of both. You know, in my part, it was written just this huge span of instruments, from this teeny little bell to this very low bass drum. But the cool thing I think about it is, you know, having worked with him over the years, it was, you know, he never really expected you to play the piece like as a Chinese instrument. You know, it was always that idea, but there was always a sense like, you know, be you, you know, and what a beautiful thought, like that, you know, as non-Asian, obviously, you know, like capturing this sound and trying, you know, as a percussionist, trying to worry that I'm figuring it out exactly or something like that. He would be like, well, let's just hear your instruments. Or I was lucky enough to actually play on some of Perez's instruments. He would bring them to the rehearsals and we'd get to play on them. That was a special treat. But just the idea that it was like, it's universal, like it kind of sounds like this, but just do what you want, you know, like just be you. And it was like, wow, that's really, so I don't know if that really answers your question, but you know, the certainly the range represents like the expanse of, you know, forests and pines and eternal, you know, I mean, like how else can you do it? It's perfect, you know.
Well, and actually, Michael, your reply makes me think of something that's part of my question, which I thought I might actually pose. I think it's wonderful that there are 3 people here who have worked at length with Chou Wen-chung. It's really incredible. So I don't know who might want to answer this question, but that you were talking about the contrast, and one thing that he talks about in his program notes is the timelessness of the universe versus the physical constraints on the earth. And what a challenge this is to compare that, the timelessness, complete timelessness, and then here we are on earth and we have all these physical constraints. So I was wondering whether Chou Wen-chung ever spoke with you, Michael, or with you, Chinary, or with you, Harvey, about that concept.
Does somebody want to go first? I can certainly, I have a perspective, but if Chinary or Harvey wants to say something, please feel free. I don't want to
Go ahead, guys.
I was telling everybody, for the audience members, I was telling a story of just a really kind of, I got to say, it doesn't, I hate to say it before I tell a story, it's like telling a joke and saying the punchline's not going to be funny. But the story isn't really about anything particular, but it's just so representative of him and somehow his music and that statement that you just said, the timelessness and, you know, basically my mom was a refugee from World War II, from the Holocaust. She ran away from Poland in 1939. I won't go into that story, but she found herself actually in Shanghai with her family. A few years later, like probably around 1941, I'm guessing somewhere there. Coincidentally, while I was working and meeting with Professor Chou, he talked about, at one point he turned to me and he said, oh, you know, we're actually in his house, of Perez's house, you know, and he said, oh, you know, I mentioned my mom was in Poland and Shanghai, you know, I was like, you know, I was much younger than Professor, and I just enjoyed, you know, enjoyed talking about silly things. And I was like, oh, my mom was in Shanghai. And he was like, oh, Shanghai, wow, you know, there were these great concerts on Sunday afternoon at this, in the Jewish ghetto part of it. And I was like, oh, cool, you know, and I went back and I spoke to my mom, and my mom was around at the time. And I said, Mom, you know, were there these concerts in Shanghai? And she was like, yeah, you know, all the artists, you know, famous artists who had fled the Nazis, there were a bunch of them in that area, and they played concerts. Famous pianists, violinists, you know, I don't have names, I'm sorry. And she was, you know, maybe like 11, although she was a great classical music lover. And, you know, and this continued. So then I'd go back to Chou and I'd be like, oh, my mom remembers. And then he'd say, oh yeah, I saw, you know, and I was like, the part of the story is that I had this ridiculous missed opportunity. I kept on telling him, one day I'm going to bring my mom and we're just going to have tea one afternoon. And I just want to get you guys in the same room, because this Jewish Polish woman in Shanghai. And here's the strange thing, that I did research and I was almost afraid to do the research because I didn't want to know if it was like really true or not. I love the idea of like this weird, this classical music happening in this very strange atmosphere. And what you were saying about the human, I forget how you put it, Pat, the human condition. How did you say that?
The restraints of
the restraint. I mean, think about this in terms of restraint and the power of the human, the will to kind of go beyond that, playing Western music in a small room that you don't see my house right now, but I could just imagine Professor and my mom sitting probably in the same room. I mean, I can't imagine there were more than one concert hall like this. Hearing, and then I did some research just the other day in preparation for this, because I really want to believe the story to be true. And I was thinking, you know, I know where Chou lived. He was like 400 miles away. Like, it's probably not true. And just yesterday, I actually found, I hadn't realized when Professor, he didn't want to get conscripted to the army, I think, the Japanese army. So he fled his town and went to Shanghai. And I was like, yeah, like, I just love the story. This idea that, and then they both end up like in New York. I don't know. I know that it has no point, but somehow it's just such a cool story. And
Michael,
my biggest regret is to not have had them in the room together. I really wish I did that. I'm so bummed that I didn't.
Michael, that is an incredible story. And I hope that every person has something in their life that is comparable or equivalent to that. You know, it's like time bending and the most incredible, you know, we call it a coincidence, but maybe it's not a coincidence. At any rate, the clock is ticking and we must move on. And I think your story is a great place to bring this segment of our presentation to a close. So I think we're ready to wrap up our broadcast at this point.
What a wonderful conversation. Thank you all. And let me say how honored we are to have Harvey Sollberger hosting this event. Harvey is a renowned composer, flutist conductor, and a distinguished emeritus professor from the University of California at San Diego. And in 1962, together with Charles Warrenen, Harvey co-founded and co-directed the Group for Contemporary Music, a trailblazing group that inspired imitation and opposition from numerous younger groups. Really quite an inspiration for us, for sure. When Da Capo won the Naumburg Award, Harvey wrote our commissioned piece, Riding the Wind 1. It was unforgettable. Thank you, Harvey.
Pat, thank you. You bring me near to tears with your kind words. Thank you very much for remembering. And I'll pass the baton to Chinary at this point.
Thank you, everyone, for this marvelous panel, and thank you for outstanding performance of the pieces. Thank you.
And I'd like to say the same thing. It's really an honor to be on a panel with the four of you, Chinary, Harvey, and of course, Pat and Marianne, my New York performing friends. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, I agree totally. This has been very fun and I'm honored to be a part of this. I just want to let everyone know that the series background music that you're hearing, that you heard at the beginning, at the end, is the famous Petrushkates piece written for Da Capo chamber players by founding pianist of Da Capo chamber players, Joan Tower. It was commissioned by the ensemble in honor of its 10th anniversary, and the performance was at Bard College, September 2014. It's one of the most important pieces that the group has commissioned and still plays. So also, please join us for the program number 3. It will be a YouTube presentation on Tuesday, June 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And the title of the program is Tian to Merging Cultures. We will explore sounds of Native American history merged with African American history, with Valerie Coleman's Freedmen of the 5 Civilized Tribes, and as a memorial, and also as memorialized in Kyle Gann's Hovenweep. The host of the event will be Bruce Adolph, with special guest Kyle Gann and members of the Capo Chamber Players.
Thank you, Marianne. We talk a lot about what we have done, our 150 pieces written for us, our trips to Russia and so forth, but we owe a huge thank you to all of our funders. I won't list them all. They're all listed in the program. You have a PDF of the program available, but I want you to know how much we appreciate them. Their faith in us helps make our work possible. And in particular, We are dedicating this series to Bernard Hulbert, MD. The Hulbert Charitable Trust has given us support for more than 2 decades and has made a significant difference in the scope of what we can offer. We're honored to extend this dedication. Harvey.
And I'll just say a few words in utter and absolute conclusion to our event. I'd like to read something that Wen-chung wrote. I don't know if he wrote it early in the 20th century or if he wrote it 50 years ago. Chinary may know. Here's what Wen-chung wrote. One must search beyond the procedures of a musical practice, discern its original aesthetic commitments, and trace how its tradition has evolved. So in this, Wen-chung is speaking to a seeker, perhaps a young composer. He goes on, and I quote him again, if one is blessed with a cross-cultural heritage, one must then regard it as a privilege and an obligation to commit oneself to the search in both practices. Wen-chung puts a lot of emphasis, I think, on 2 words. One of them is privilege, which those who are blessed with a cross-cultural heritage have. It's an opportunity. And at the same time, there's an obligation, that word obligation that he uses, that means that one cannot take this lightly. One must do one's homework and work very hard indeed. And after having heard Chinary's piece and Wen-chung's piece, I find myself in agreement that both Chinary and Wen-chung mastered that art of straddling different cultures. There's an old saying, east is east and west is west, and ne'er the twain shall meet. I think that was coined by the arch-imperialist Rudyard Kipling. I may be wrong, but at any rate, I think Chinary's and Wen-chung's music, in its permeability, in its ability to mediate between 2 different cultures, prove to us that there is meeting ground and ground for agreement and expansion of via the imagination. And this is, I think, planting a seed for the future. And I think you, Chinary, and Wen-chung have enriched us tremendously and enriched our culture. And for that, I can only be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.